Welcome to Mystery Us. I'm Tony Pratt, host of Mystery Us, and our guest on this edition of the program is Paul Von Ward. Paul is an interdisciplinary cosmologist and independent scholar who is the author of several books including Our Solarian Legacy, God's Genes and Consciousness, and his latest book is called Soul Genome, Science and Reincarnation. Welcome to Mystery Us, Paul Von Ward.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm delighted to be with you.
Or should I say welcome back to Mystery Us.
I enjoyed the first time so much that I decided to come back, and I appreciate your inviting me.
We discussed your latest book, which is Soul Genome.
Right.
But we're going to backtrack now and talk about your book, God's Genes and Consciousness.
Great.
Now, Paul, the subheading of your book, Our Solarian Legacy, humans are described as multidimensional beings in a self-learning universe. What are those? What are multidimensional beings, and what is a self-learning universe?
What do those words mean?
Yes.
Well, the title, I used Our Solarian Legacy because I was trying to get across the notion that we humans are more than mere earthlings.
Right.
That we really are bigger beings in the cosmos, in the galaxy, in the universe, however you want to think about it. That book is really my cosmology. You introduced me as an interdisciplinary cosmologist, and I think I'm the only one in the world, because other people focus on just physics or on biology or mathematics or the evolutionary theory. I believe that a true cosmologist should look at all of the ways of knowing, all of the things that humans experience in terms of the perceptions they have, the information they have, the knowledge and experience they have in the universe. So that's being an interdisciplinary cosmologist. I use psychology, I use biology, I use physics, I use anthropology, I use history. The multidimensional universe, to get back to your question, is the way that we now think of the universe. We're not just a three-dimensional time and space or four-dimensional time-space universe. We really have other dimensions, and string theory in physics has postulated up to 10 or 12 or even more dimensions.
Right.
And this is important in that book, and what I try to do is to describe how those other dimensions are the likely dimensions through which we experience things like precognition, where we see scenes in another location. All of these senses, I call them the inner senses and the use of the subtle energies for things like psychokinesis. And that's a whole discussion
Which is
in
moving objects with your mind.
Moving
psychokinesis.
objects with your mind, or having an effect on, say, plants, or on other particles, or on other people. Psychokinetic experiences could be, staring at someone, as Rupert Sheldrake demonstrated in his experiments, and causing that person to turn their head and look to see who's staring. That's a psychokinetic effect.
Right. Do you think what's happening is your energy field is just extending to communicate to that person on some level?
Well, I don't think it's that mechanical where we extend our energy field. What physics now suggests to us is that there's not a movement. It's something that they call the principle of non-locality, meaning that when you act in a thought, that what your thought is connected to through time and space reacts instantaneously. So it's not like sending something out, it's like thinking the thought and the action is there. You see, not here. There's a little difference there.
Right, and in some cases it can actually arrive before you send it, or there's...
Well, I would suggest that it arrives before you overtly send it, but not before the intention.
Okay.
In other words, as soon as you begin to form the thought, it's instantaneous.
Okay.
There are a lot of experiments. Cleve Baxter, who does the work with communication between humans and plants and other biological cells and so on, he's demonstrated pretty clearly that that's an instantaneous measurement of the impact of the intention itself when it's first formed, even before you verbalize it.
Mm-hmm. Now we want to highlight your book, God's Genes and Consciousness. You want to hold it up
Yeah,
and let
let's
the camera
let
get a
people
shot of
see
it?
that.
It's got a really cool cover.
Well, I'm really proud of this particular book. This is a
Hold
very...
it up just a little bit, please.
I need to get it up a little bit.
Yes,
We
sir.
certainly want to have all the words shown, and I need to show Paul Von Ward at the bottom and the title. Now, this book is the most, I think it's the most controversial one.
Yeah,
Let
there
me
it is.
see if I can straighten it up there.
That's good.
Okay, I'm moving it around. There we go. Everybody can see that. Now, that book, like all the other books, are available in bookstores, on Amazon.com, at my website, online booksellers all over.
And your website is www.vonward.com.
That's correct, yeah.
And you can be contacted via email at paul@vonward.com.
Right. Now, the reason I say this book is more controversial, although the reincarnation one may turn out to be controversial. It's only out a few weeks, and
Right.
we don't know what all the reaction's going to be to that. But God's Genes and Consciousness is much more controversial because...
Of the subheading, Non-Human Intervention in Human History.
You got it. Because what I do is I look at human history. You know, I've been to a lot of conferences on UFOs and ETs.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to a lot of religious meetings on angels and devils and so on. I've been to a lot of psychological meetings where people talk about hearing voices and psychic information that comes from other beings and so on. I've read history in the Bible, and I read about Yahweh on the mountaintop, not seen by Moses, but speaking to Moses. I read about Gabriel and the messages that he gave to Muhammad, who had them translated and transcribed and birthed another religion, and Moroni, who spoke to Joseph Smith and started another religion. And there are many, many examples around the world of beings who are more advanced than humans. And I say more advanced because they take the initiative to speak to humans. We can't really take the initiative. We can pray to them. We can send intentional thoughts to them. We can say, I'm ready to receive your message. But it's the being that's not the human being that takes the initiative. So for that, from that point of view, I use the word advanced beings. But what I did was I looked at all of these, the religious text of old, the intermediate text of psychics and so on, and the current UFO ET stories. And I found that they were all very, very similar in many, many ways.
Right.
And so I said, if we as a modern society want to understand how all of these have influenced our own development, our own institutions, we've got to look at them as a scientific, objective observer. In other words, we don't want to make any foregone conclusions about what they are and where they came from and what their power is. Let's study the evidence. So that book, God's Genes and Consciousness, is an effort to take all of these interactions that humans have reported with other beings historically and right down to the present, and look at them as natural phenomenon, other beings, other species, other levels of consciousness, other dimensions, and look at how we have reacted to them. And that's the issue of the book.
But the implication is that there could be some kind, these advanced beings, whether they're interdimensional or alien, are interacting with humanity and sending them messages, doing things, and maybe the perception of angels are, I mean, they came from the heavens. Maybe the heavens is just the sky.
Oh yes, well, if you look back historically, you see that the gods of old, that is, the gods who were worshipped by the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the Hebrews and the early Christians and the Gnostics and so on. The early words, that it was not gods, that's a recent word, but Deva, Dios, Deus, Diva, come from Sanskrit and then brought over from India into the Middle East, into the languages of the Middle East that then got translated into God in English and Dios in Latin. Those words meant beings from the sky. And so the descriptions, I mean, if you look in the Bible, Ezekiel, the fiery chariot,
Sure.
that description is no different from descriptions we're getting today of UFO phenomenon. If you look at the stories from Africa or from Native Americans, and if you look at the art, for example, of Native Americans showing objects from the sky that are circular and whirling, and they're very much like those reported in Indian texts and Hebrew text and other texts. So what I'm suggesting is in the book, and this is what's controversial, I'm suggesting that the historical stories are really no different than the current A, B, and E.T. stories.
Right.
That the way they're described by humans, the kind of messages that are given, the kinds of interaction that are given, and the human reaction to them is very similar. And what concerns me is the human reaction. We are afraid of them. We are submissive to them. We bow down and worship them. We form cults around them. All of these things happen around the world and have happened historically. And what I'm suggesting is that if we're going to, as a human planet, have peace on earth among ourselves, we've got to sit down around a table and say, this is the information that I got from the God I believe in. This is the information I got from the psychic channel that I believe in. This is the information I got when I was abducted to a UFO craft, and this is what the aliens told me we need to do to save ourselves on this planet. Because all the messages were, for the most part, pretty helpful. They were positive messages.
Right.
Except some of them were very threatening, because they said, if you don't change your ways, if you don't change your behavior, you're going to destroy yourselves.
Right.
You're going to destroy your planet. You're going to destroy your society. The problem comes when you have the priesthood that comes in between.
Right.
And this happened in history, where you had the person or the persons who received these messages on Mount Sinai, in the desert in Arabia, in the United States in terms of Moroni speaking. And this goes right on down to the current day. I mean, there's Ramtha, who speaks to J.Z. Knight out in Oregon. You've got the Course in Miracles. You still have these kinds of voices happening. And what happens, the humans who get this information then make themselves the authorities and the interpreters of these voices from other beings.
Right.
And what happens then is that they begin to get control of institutions. They get control of groups of humans who look to them as the interpreters of the information. And what that does is put all of us then in a very, what I would call unhuman mode.
Where you're just subjugated to the authority of
the authority of the interpreters,
right,
of the priesthood. And the priesthood could be any group. I mean, in New Age terminology, it's the channel, you know, who says, I received a message from so-and-so, and if you will sit and listen to me, that voice will speak through me.
Right.
And what happens is we know from research and studies of these phenomena that any communication from other beings that comes through a human interpreter is just like me interpreting a Frenchman speaking to you, and you don't speak French, and I, in my French, which is not perfect, try to explain to you what that Frenchman said.
Right.
So you have the voices that are speaking to humans, and you have imperfect humans with their own worldview, their own biases, their own assumptions, explaining what was said. And that leads to dependence of all of those people who listen to the interpreters. And so the interpreters then have a great deal of power and authority.
Yeah, I know the lost books support this theory. They're just chock full of examples of things that sound like a lot of the current alien abduction reports, or even the Roswell incident where they had the piece of material and it couldn't cut it, couldn't burn it.
Right.
The same thing was true of in the lost books of a piece of Jesus's swaddling clothes was cut. It was a tradition for the wise men were going to burn it in the fire. They were going to cut it up into pieces so they each have a piece to symbolically burn in the fire. And
sure. And
they couldn't cut it or burn it. And
exactly. Well, you have the same descriptions. You know, you have, if you take Moses on Mount Sinai, you know, appearing as a cloud of smoke by day and as a burning fire at night. This is very reminiscent of a lot of the UFO reports today. And I mentioned Ezekiel earlier. There are many others. You look at the Roman mythology. You look at the Indian mythology. You have the same description of crafts. You have firing rockets. You have firing jets. You have noise and thunder and roaring, and you have people with wings coming down, and you have people interacting with humans. And just as it says in the Old Testament, the gods of old found favor with the women, the daughters of men, and had intercourse with them, and created the giants.
Right.
Well, this story is replete with details that you can find in traditions around the world, and that you find actually today in the UFO literature. So what bothers me is that we have all this information, historical and worldwide, about these experiences, and we don't, as a society, sit down and talk about them the way we would talk about the problem with, food difficulties, or problems about disease, or if we have a problem in our society, frequently we try to sit down around a table and talk about the evidence.
Right. But logic is not allowed. I mean, just like in the Lost Books also, they have the Ark of the Covenant there, and a voice speaks to them from the Ark. You know, I don't know, it could be some kind of communicator device, or but there's an actual, the way it's described, the voice is telling them what to do. And in fact, when they didn't pick the husband for Mary, they went back and said nothing happened. You know, there was supposed to be a sign that it that it was going to be Joseph or whatever, and then the voice explained to them why it didn't work because Joseph wasn't there.
That's right. Well, this is, see, what we do is we make divine things which are natural interactions. And what I've tried to do in that book, and the reason I lumped all of these things together, is to suggest that it's time to, as human beings who are in our consciousness, in our essence, in our soul genome, as we talked about in that earlier program, we're all part of the universal consciousness. Whatever and whoever the creator of this universe is, we are all equal aspects of that force, of that consciousness. And what happens when people lose that sense of who we are and our independence as individuals and our free will to make choices and to live and learn and adapt and progress, and we give up our power to the interpreters, to the people who write the books, who interpret the books, and who distort the books. And we know from history that so many of these books, they're in so many different versions.
Yeah, one example I was going to ask you about in that previous interview that I forgot to was the fact that originally both Judaism and Christianity had beliefs in reincarnation.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
All of the early religious traditions believed in reincarnation, because what happened is, before the current supernatural religions of Judaism and Christianity and Islam and the offshoots of those, you had a natural belief in reincarnation. If you look at Rome, for example, and Greece more particularly, prior to the time of Jesus in that part of the world, both the Greeks and the Hebrews and the Egyptians and the other cultures in that area talked of reincarnation in natural terms, just the way I talk about it today.
It was just accepted.
It was accepted. This is part of the process, and so on. And that, even up at the time of Jesus, although we're not sure exactly what he said because the books have been revised several times in the history of the church, but the references of, you know, are you the reincarnation of Elijah?
Yeah.
Or is John the Baptist the reincarnation of so-and-so? I mean, these kinds of discussions and questions were natural, and there was no question about it. They were talking about what we're talking about in terms of reincarnation. About 500 years into Christianity, then, of course, the church hierarchy and the emperor, who was head of the Roman church at the time, they decided that we have to say no, because that didn't coincide with the theology that was developing in the church.
Now, you contend that at some point in history, these advanced beings left. They just deserted humanity, and they were no longer there kind of overseeing their development.
Well, I suggested that about 1500 BC, about 3,500 years ago, I think the beings that historically are described as physically on the earth, living in the temples in Sumeria and Arcadia, in the pyramids in Egypt and so on, these beings appear to have physically withdrawn. And if you look at the African stories about that time, they said, the African stories say things like, these beings on the planet were fighting among themselves. The brothers couldn't get along.
Right.
So the father said, come back up here to the spaceship in the sky.
Yeah.
And so they withdrew physically. So I think that's an event that happened about 3,500 years ago. But what happened is that the communications have continued. And I think the visits have been resumed. We don't have a colonization of humans at the moment under these ABs, but we do have experiments being done. We have communications. We have messages sent telepathically. So this kind of interaction is still going on. And that's why you still, you know, have revelations that start new religious cults. I mean, Yahweh was, you know, about that time, about 3,500 years ago.
Yes.
And I would suggest that Yahweh was one of those beings who had been here physically and left, and then spoke through this cloud and smoke to keep himself separate, because the gods had decided we're going to be separate.
Yeah. Now, in the lost books, the wise men were following this star, and I know they've been called Chaldeans or astrologers, but they were literally following it according to the description. The star descended in front of a cave which was built into a stable where Jesus was born, and it lit up the whole cave with a bright light, which there we go with Close Encounters of the Third
we've
Kind
had
again.
we've had a lot of recent reports of lights lighting up areas and illuminating individuals and taking individuals away. And
have you personally had any encounters with any kind of advanced beings or telepath? Or
I'm not aware of any direct encounters.
Yeah.
I think that my mind is one that sort of is not as credulous as others, and my role as a human being and as a scientist is to sort of observe neutral.
Right.
In other words, I would say, as one of my friends, a psychologist, also says, I study a lot of groups, I know a lot of areas and a lot of worldviews, but I'm not a joiner of any group.
Right.
And I think that sets me apart from that kind of experience. I have had, I think, communications and experiences that suggest that I'm a part of that larger community, but I'm not really a devotee of any particular group.
Literature and the evidence suggests out there that we've got abductees, people that feel like they've been abducted by aliens. Of course, I believe a lot of that could be out-of-body abduction rather than actual physical abduction, but as compared to the contactees who are just in telepathic communication, what kind of weight do you give to telepathic type events as compared to supposed?
I think they're both, they should be treated equally.
Okay.
I mean, I think the physical events are events, and I think there's plenty of evidence that we do have some physical contact. We do have some evidence of implants or artifacts that are left behind, or body wounds and so on. We do have physical evidence, but it seems to me that that's just a different level, and both are described by some people as negative experiences, and both are described as positive experiences, whether it's interdimensional or three-dimensional.
Have you had any other type of paranormal experiences personally?
Well, I don't call them paranormal. I mean, I have done workshops for a number of years. I don't do them anymore, but I did for a number of years on telepathy and precognition and remote viewing. And I mean, I have used these inner senses in a number of ways over time, in terms of experiments and workshops, and in terms of my own, I think, access to information. I think all of us do. It's a matter of opening up that inner channel to communications from other beings and other levels of consciousness and other levels of our own consciousness. I think we're playing an organ, you know. We're putting the pressure on and releasing it, and we release it, and things come in, and we press down, and we keep it away from ourselves. And to me, life is a balancing act, taking in information from any source, and then stopping the intake and reflecting on and thinking about and analyzing what you have received and trying to make sense of it. And that's what my books are. I mean, trying to make sense of multidimensional information, multidimensional beings in this universe where everybody's evolving and growing.
Does your research suggest that there is a pattern or some sort of agenda that the alien beings or advanced beings are, you know, trying to?
I think they are also mixed.
Okay.
I think there are agendas that have the human interest at heart. We have a lot of stories in both the Bible and the apocryphal books of the ABs attempting to help humans, give advice and guidance that's helpful, passing on useful knowledge and information. I think that's still going on. There are also ABs who would like to take advantage of what we produce and what we give off in terms of energy and in terms of service.
Right.
And so you got both.
Okay, our guest has been Paul Von Ward, the author of God's Genes and Consciousness. Thank you for being on Mystery Us.
Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate it very much. It's been a pleasure to be on your program.